A sharp clang echoed as the gas station's door swung open. The metallic sound barely drowned out the raucous laughter of a group of leather-clad bikers who swaggered inside. Outside, a row of chrome-drenched motorcycles gleamed under the afternoon sun. The leader barked orders to his crew. "Load up, boys. Let's show these folks how it's done." At the far end of the lot, two black soldiers in uniform quietly pumped gas into their SUV. They exchanged uneasy glances as the bikers' voices carried over. It wasn't the first time they had encountered trouble, but something about this group felt different. The bikers had noticed them too. Their laughter grew louder, tinged with mockery. "Hey," one of the bikers shouted, striding over. "Ain't you two a little far from your kind of neighborhood?" The soldiers didn't respond, choosing to focus on their task. The air grew tense. The leader of the bikers sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Aw, don't ignore us now. We're just trying to be friendly." He stepped closer, his shadow falling over the soldiers. The younger of the two soldiers, Private Marcus Johnson, clenched his jaw. His partner, Sergeant Darnell Hayes, a seasoned veteran, placed a calming hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Not worth it," Darnell muttered, but the bikers were intent on pushing boundaries. In a flash, the leader snatched the gas nozzle from Marcus's hand and threw it to the ground. Gasoline splattered everywhere. The bikers roared with laughter. "You gonna do something about it, soldier boy?" Marcus's fists tightened, but Darnell stepped between them, his voice calm but firm. "We're not looking for trouble. Just let us fill up and we'll be on our way." "Oh, we ain't done yet," the leader growled. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a knife. The sunlight caught the blade, making it gleam ominously. "You're gonna learn some respect today." Darnell's hand instinctively went to his belt, where his service knife was sheathed. Marcus's heart pounded. The tension was at its breaking point. Then it happened. The sudden roar of engines filled the air, drowning out everything. The bikers froze as three massive black SUVs pulled into the station, skidding to a halt. Doors flew open, and out stepped 6 more soldiers in full combat fatigues, their faces hard as stone. "Is there a problem here?" one of them barked, his voice authoritative and sharp. The bikers' confidence wavered, but the leader wasn't backing down yet. "This ain't your fight, boys." The soldier who had spoken stepped forward, his presence commanding. "You got 3 seconds to back off before you learn what real regret feels like." The bikers hesitated, looking between each other and their leader. The atmosphere was electric. Would they stand down, or were they foolish enough to escalate? The leader's grip on the knife tightened as he made the decision he regretted his entire life. Earlier that day, the sun hung high in the sky as Darnell and Marcus cruised down a quiet highway. They had just wrapped up a grueling week of training exercises and were headed home for a much-needed break. The SUV's engine purred smoothly as they exchanged stories and laughed about their misadventures on base. "Man, I can't wait to sleep in my own bed," Marcus said, stretching his arms. "Barracks life is no joke." Darnell chuckled. "You'll get used to it. Just think of it as part of the package." As they drove, they spotted a gas station up ahead. "Let's fuel up here," Darnell said, pulling off the highway. The station was small, with only a few pumps and a convenience store. A quiet hum of activity surrounded it. Families on road trips, truckers grabbing snacks, and a couple of locals chatting by the entrance. Everything seemed normal, until they noticed the group of bikers loitering near the pumps. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "You think they're trouble?" Darnell shrugged. "Maybe. Just stay cool." They parked at the farthest pump and began refueling. For a while, nothing happened. The bikers were loud but didn't seem to pay them much attention. Inside the store, the cashier, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, nervously glanced at the bikers every few seconds. She'd seen them before, and their visits usually spelled trouble. "Anything else?" she asked one of the bikers as he paid for a drink. "Nah, sweetheart," he replied with a smirk, leaning over the counter. "Unless you got a number to go with that pretty smile." The cashier forced a polite laugh, hoping they'd leave soon, but the leader noticed the soldiers outside and nudged his crew. "Looks like we got some fresh entertainment." The bikers filed out of the store, their laughter echoing across the lot. They approached Darnell and Marcus with deliberate slowness, like predators sizing up their prey. As the bikers closed in, Marcus felt his pulse quicken. He knew Darnell was right about staying calm, but it was hard not to feel the rising heat of anger and fear. They were outnumbered and far from any immediate help. But Darnell had been through worse. He remained composed, his eyes locked on the leader, ready to de-escalate if possible, or defend if necessary. The bikers circled them, throwing insults and laughing at their own jokes. It was clear they were trying to provoke a reaction. Marcus focused on controlling his breathing, following Darnell's lead. "Let's just get out of here," Marcus whispered. "Not yet," Darnell replied, his voice steady. "We'll leave when we're ready, not when they say so." The bikers didn't like that. The leader's face darkened, and that's when he decided to escalate things by pulling the knife. With reinforcements now on the scene, the gas station standoff was reaching its boiling point. The bikers had a choice: walk away or risk finding out just how wrong they'd been. Would they make the right decision, or was this about to explode into something no one could walk away from unscathed? The gas station was silent, except for the faint hum of the SUV's engines. Every eye was on the biker leader, his knife glinting in the sun. The tension was suffocating, as if the entire world had stopped to see what would happen next. The leader's lip curled into a sneer. "You soldiers think you can scare us." Sergeant Hayes, the soldier who had stepped forward, didn't flinch. His calm, measured voice cut through the tension like a blade. "This isn't a game. Put the knife down and walk away while you still can." The leader chuckled darkly, his confidence boosted by the presence of his crew. "You think your fancy uniforms mean anything out here? We own this town." The bikers murmured in agreement, their bravado returning. But then, one of the soldiers from the SUVs stepped forward, a towering man named Corporal Jackson, whose sheer size made even the leader hesitate. "Listen," Jackson said, his voice deep and steady. "We've had a long week, and we're not in the mood for this nonsense. Drop the knife, get on your bikes, and ride out of here. This is your last warning." The leader's bravado flickered. He glanced around, realizing that the soldiers were not just standing there. They were positioned strategically, ready to act. His crew was outmatched, not just in numbers, but in sheer discipline and skill. But pride was a dangerous thing. The leader spat on the ground and raised the knife slightly. "Let's see if you're all talk." Before anyone could react, there was a sudden blur of motion. Marcus, the youngest soldier, moved faster than anyone expected. With a swift, well-practiced maneuver, he disarmed the leader, sending the knife clattering to the ground. The gas station erupted into chaos. The bikers lunged forward, but they were met with a wall of military precision. The soldiers didn't draw their weapons. They didn't need to. Their training kicked in as they neutralized the bikers with calculated efficiency. Marcus and Darnell worked in perfect tandem, defending each other as they subdued their attackers. Jackson easily handled two bikers at once, his sheer strength overwhelming them. Within moments, the bikers were on the ground, groaning in pain and struggling to get back up. The leader was the last to fall. Darnell pinned him against the side of the gas pump, his voice low and dangerous. "You messed with the wrong people today." The leader gasped for air, his bravado shattered. All right, we're done." Darnell released him, and the leader crumpled to the ground, clutching his side. The other bikers looked on in stunned silence, their confidence shattered. The gas station attendant stepped out cautiously, her hands trembling. Is everything okay?" Darnell gave her a reassuring nod. "It's under control, ma'am." The soldiers regrouped, standing tall and composed despite the chaos around them. Marcus felt a rush of adrenaline coursing through his veins, but he kept his composure, just as Darnell had taught him. "Let's get out of here," Darnell said quietly. They returned to their SUV, leaving the bikers to nurse their wounds. As they prepared to leave, Jackson turned back to the bikers. "Next time, think twice before you mess with someone who's just minding their business." The soldiers drove off, the tension in the air slowly dissipating. Inside the SUV, Marcus let out a long breath. "That was intense," he said, his hands still gripping the steering wheel tightly. Darnell nodded. "You did good, but remember, violence is a last resort. We were lucky things didn't get worse." Marcus understood, but he couldn't shake the feeling of satisfaction. For once, the bullies had been put in their place. But the story wasn't over. As the soldiers drove further down the highway, a pair of headlights appeared in their rearview mirror. The bikers weren't done yet. They were following, this time with reinforcements, several more motorcycles and a black pickup truck trailing behind. Marcus's eyes narrowed as he noticed the vehicles gaining on them. "We've got company." Darnell glanced back, his expression hardening. Looks like they didn't learn their lesson. Jackson, sitting in the back seat, cracked his knuckles. "If they want round two, we'll give it to them." The roar of the bikers' engines grew louder as they closed the distance. One of them pulled alongside the SUV, brandishing a crowbar and smashing it against the side of the vehicle. Darnell's voice was calm but firm. "Buckle up. Things are about to get rough." The SUV swerved slightly as the crowbar struck the side, leaving a long scratch along the metallic surface. Marcus tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. The bikers were gaining confidence, their engines roaring like a pack of wolves closing in on their prey. Darnell's voice was steady, cutting through the chaos. "Stay focused. We trained for worse." Marcus nodded, his heart pounding. He adjusted his side mirror and saw the black pickup truck speeding up behind them. In the bed of the truck, 2 more bikers were standing, holding what looked like chains and mats. "They got weapons," Marcus muttered, "and they're not just here to scare us." Jackson leaned forward from the back seat, his massive frame filling the SUV. "Time to even the playing field." Darnell's eyes flicked to Marcus. "Stay calm, follow my lead, and don't lose control of the vehicle." Marcus nodded, his jaw set. He pressed down on the accelerator, the SUV surging forward. The bikers didn't back off, instead, they pushed harder, determined to catch up. One of the bikers pulled alongside the passenger side and swung his chain, aiming for the side mirror. Jackson rolled down the window just in time, catching the chain mid-swing. With a powerful yank, he pulled the biker off his motorcycle, sending him skidding across the asphalt. "That's one down," Jackson said with a grim satisfaction. The biker behind him swerved to avoid the fallen rider, but the pickup truck wasn't deterred. It pulled up closer, and the driver leaned out of the window, a shotgun in his hands. "They got a gun," Marcus shouted, his voice edged with panic. Darnell didn't hesitate. "Marcus, stay ready to brake hard on my signal." Marcus nodded, gripping the wheel tighter. Darnell reached under his seat and pulled out a small case, opening it to reveal a flare gun. "What are you going to do with that?" Marcus asked, eyes darting between the road and the bikers. "Send them a message," Darnell said, loading a flare. The pickup truck was now dangerously close, the shotgun aimed directly at the SUV's rear window. The driver smirked, confident he had them cornered. But before he could fire, Darnell leaned out of the window and fired the flare. The bright fiery projectile hit the truck's hood, exploding in a burst of sparks. The driver swerved wildly, momentarily blinded by the sudden light. His shotgun went off, but the blast missed, shattering the windshield of an abandoned car on the side of the road. "Now, Marcus," Darnell shouted. Marcus slammed on the brakes, the SUV screeching to a sudden halt. The pickup truck, unable to stop in time, veered off the road, crashing into a ditch. The bikers behind it scattered, some losing control and toppling over. Jackson grinned. "Looks like they're learning the hard way." But the leader of the bikers, riding at the front, wasn't giving up. He revved his engine and sped toward the SUV, his face twisted in rage. Darnell saw him coming and nodded to Marcus. "Time to end this," Darnell said. Marcus shifted the SUV into reverse, slamming into the leader's bike just as he tried to pass. The force sent the motorcycle flying, the leader crashing hard onto the pavement. He rolled to a stop, groaning in pain as his bike lay in a twisted heap. The remaining bikers hesitated, their confidence shattered. One by one, they turned their bikes around and sped off, leaving their leader behind. Darnell stepped out of the SUV, his boots crunching against the gravel. He walked over to the fallen leader, who was struggling to sit up. "You had your chance to walk away," Darnell said, his voice low and cold. "Next time, think twice before you pick a fight you can't win." The leader glared at him, but said nothing, his pride too wounded to respond. Darnell turned and walked back to the SUV, where Marcus and Jackson were waiting. "We good?" Marcus asked, his adrenaline still pumping. Darnell nodded. "For now." The soldiers got back into the SUV and continued down the highway, leaving the chaos behind. The tension in the vehicle slowly began to ease, but the weight of what had just happened lingered. Marcus glanced at Darnell. "You think they'll come after us again?" Darnell shook his head. "Not after what just happened. They've had enough." Jackson leaned back, a satisfied grin on his face. "Well, that was a fun little detour." Marcus chuckled nervously, the adrenaline still wearing off. "If that's what we call fun, I hate to see what you call a bad day." The soldiers shared a laugh, the camaraderie easing the tension. But beneath the humor, they all knew how close things had come to going south. They drove in silence for a while, the hum of the engine the only sound. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm orange glow over the landscape. It felt like they could finally breathe again. But the peace didn't last long. As they rounded a bend in the road, they were met with an unexpected sight. A roadblock made of motorcycles, with several bikers standing in the middle of the highway. At the center of the group stood a man in a different leather jacket, his arms crossed and a menacing grin on his face. It was clear that the bikers had called in reinforcements. "What now?" Marcus asked, his voice tense. Darnell's eyes narrowed. Looks like they weren't done after all. Jackson cracked his knuckles again. "Guess it's time for round 3. The line of motorcycles stretched across the road, blocking any chance of passing through. The setting sun cast long shadows, making the figures of the bikers look even more imposing. At the center of the blockade stood a man unlike the others. His leather jacket bore insignias that marked him as someone in charge, a leader of the larger biker network. He raised a hand, signaling his crew to stay put as the soldier's SUV slowed to a stop a few yards away. His grin was cold, calculating. Unlike the brashness of the first leader, this man carried himself with a dangerous confidence. "Looks like you boys wandered into the wrong part of town," he called out, his voice carrying over the quiet hum of engines. Inside the SUV, Marcus gripped the steering wheel tightly. "What do you, Sarge?" Darnell studied the scene, his sharp eyes scanning for any weaknesses in the bikers' formation. "We've got no choice but to deal with this head-on. These guys aren't just here to scare us. They want to finish what their friends started." Jackson, seated in the back, let out a low chuckle. "Then, let's give them a fight they won't forget." Darnell nodded, his face set. "All right." Marcus on my signal floored it. "Jackson, you're on suppression. Let's show them what teamwork looks like." Marcus took a deep breath, his heart pounding as he prepared for what was about to happen. The SUV's engine rumbled, a subtle warning to the bikers ahead. 3, Darnell began, his voice calm but firm. 2, 1, go. Marcus slammed his foot on the accelerator, and the SUV surged forward. The bikers didn't expect such a bold move. The lead rider tried to jump out of the way, but the SUV plowed through the makeshift roadblock, sending motorcycles scattering like dominoes. Chaos erupted. The bikers scrambled to recover, some diving for cover while others tried to mount their bikes to pursue. Jackson leaned out of the back window, wielding a tactical baton he had grabbed from the SUV's gear compartment. He swung at the bikers who got too close, knocking them off balance and giving Marcus the space he needed to maneuver. The SUV swerved to avoid a biker who had thrown himself onto the hood, but Marcus managed to shake him off with a sharp turn. The biker tumbled to the side of the road, groaning as he hit the ground. Behind them, the remaining bikers regrouped quickly. The man in the leather jacket barked orders, and soon the roar of engines filled the air again. They weren't giving up that easily. "Darnell," Marcus said through gritted teeth, "they're gaining on us." Darnell nodded, formulating a plan on the fly. "Jackson, get ready. We're taking this fight to them." Marcus swerved onto a narrow side road, leading the chase into a more confined area surrounded by thick woods. The bikers followed closely, their headlights cutting through the growing darkness. Darnell reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small EMP device, a tool designed for field operations. This should even the odds. He handed it to Jackson, who grinned. "You're full of surprises, Sarge." Jackson waited for the right moment, then leaned out of the window again. As the bikers closed in, he activated the EMP and threw it toward the lead motorcycle. The device emitted a burst of energy, and the biker's engine sputtered and died, sending him skidding to a halt. The bikers behind him swerved to avoid a pileup, their formation breaking apart. It bought the soldiers precious seconds, but the man in the leather jacket was still in pursuit, his bike roaring with unrelenting fury. The narrow road opened up into a clearing, and Marcus saw an opportunity. "There's a bridge up ahead. If we can get across, we can cut them off." Darnell nodded. "Good. Take it, but be ready. They're not going to let us go that easily." As the SUV neared the bridge, the man in the leather jacket pulled out a handgun. He aimed at the back tires, firing off a few shots. One of them hit its mark, and the SUV lurched as the tire blew out. "Hang on," Marcus shouted, struggling to keep control of the vehicle. The SUV skidded onto the bridge, sparks flying as the rims scraped against the asphalt. Marcus managed to stabilize the vehicle, but their speed was drastically reduced. The bikers seized the advantage, surrounding the SUV on the bridge. The man in the leather jacket pulled up alongside them, his gun aimed directly at Marcus through the driver's window. "You're done," he sneered. But Darnell wasn't about to let it end like this. With lightning-fast reflexes, Darnell grabbed the handgun he had stowed earlier and fired a single shot, shattering the biker leader's front tire. The man lost control of his bike, which veered wildly before slamming into the bridge railing. The impact sent him flying over the edge. Everyone froze as the sound of metal scraping against concrete echoed, followed by the distant splash of water below. The remaining bikers stared in shock, their leader gone. Darnell's voice cut through the silence. Anyone else want to try their luck? For a moment, everything was still. The only sounds were the faint hum of the SUV's damaged engine and the distant rush of the river below. The remaining bikers exchanged nervous glances, their bravado fading. Their leader was gone, and now they faced a group of highly trained soldiers who clearly weren't afraid to fight back. One of the bikers, younger and less battle-hardened, muttered under his breath, "We should get out of here." But an older, grizzled biker with a scar running down his face growled, "Not yet." He revved his engine, signaling for the others to stay in formation. They'd got nowhere to run. Inside the SUV, Marcus's hands shook on the steering wheel. "Sarge, that bridge isn't gonna hold much longer with all this weight." Darnell glanced at the crumbling edges of the old bridge. He knew Marcus was right. "All right," he said, his voice calm despite the tension. "We'll give them one last chance to back off. If they don't take it, we finish this." Jackson nodded, cracking his knuckles. "Let's hope they're smarter than they look." Darnell stepped halfway out of the SUV, raising his hands to show he wasn't holding a weapon, yet. His voice boomed across the bridge. "This is your final warning. Turn around and ride away, or you'll regret it." The grizzled biker spat on the ground. "You think you can scare us? You're out of your league, soldier." Darnell's eyes narrowed. "Suit yourself." He ducked back into the SUV. "Marcus, get ready to push this vehicle to its limit. Jackson, we'll need cover fire." The bikers, emboldened by their leader's defiance, began to close in again, revving their engines and brandishing weapons. One of them pulled out a Molotov cocktail, lighting the rag with a flick of his lighter. "Here we go," Darnell muttered. The biker hurled the Molotov toward the SUV, aiming for the hood. But Jackson, quick as ever, leaned out of the window and used his baton to bat the flaming bottle back. It shattered on the bridge, creating a wall of fire between the bikers and the soldiers. "Nice shot," Marcus said, his voice tense but impressed. "Thanks," Jackson replied. "Now, let's get out of here." Marcus slammed the accelerator, and the SUV lurched forward despite the blown tire. The bridge groaned under the strain, cracks spider webbing across its surface. The bikers hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to follow. But the grizzled leader wasn't ready to give up. After them, he roared, leading the charge through the flames. The chase was on again, this time more dangerous than ever. The narrow, winding road on the other side of the bridge offered little room for error. Marcus expertly navigated the treacherous path, but the bikers were relentless, their engines roaring like thunder behind them. One biker managed to pull up alongside the SUV, swinging a crowbar at the passenger window. Jackson braced himself and caught the crowbar mid-swing, yanking it out of the biker's hands. With a swift motion, he tossed it back, sending the biker tumbling off his bike. Another biker tried to ram the SUV from behind, but Marcus anticipated the move. He tapped the brakes just enough to disrupt the biker's momentum, causing him to crash into the side of the road. "They're not giving up," Marcus said through gritted teeth. "How much longer can we keep this up?" "Not much," Darnell admitted. "We need to find a way to end this." Just ahead, the road curved sharply, leading to a narrow pass surrounded by rocky cliffs. Darnell's mind raced. He knew the terrain could work to their advantage if they played it right. "Marcus, take the pass," he said. "Jackson, get ready to block the road behind us." Jackson grinned. On it. The SUV sped into the pass, the bikers hot on their trail. As soon as they were through the narrowest point, Jackson leaned out of the window and used the crowbar he had confiscated earlier to knock loose a large pile of rocks. The debris tumbled down, creating an impassable barrier. The bikers skidded to a stop, cursing as they realized they were trapped. Their leader, still on his bike, glared at the soldiers as they disappeared down the road. "This isn't over," he muttered. The soldiers drove in silence for a while, the tension in the SUV finally easing. Marcus let out a long breath, his hands still trembling from the adrenaline. "Man," he said, "I thought we were done for back there." Darnell nodded. "You handled yourself well. Both of you did." Jackson leaned back, stretching his arms. "I'll admit, that was one of the more exciting rides I've been on." They shared a brief laugh, the camaraderie helping to lighten the mood. But Darnell knew better than to let his guard down completely. "They'll regroup," he said. "We bought ourselves some time, but this isn't over." Marcus frowned. "What do we do now?" "We stick to the plan," Darnell replied. "Get to the safe house, regroup, and prepare for whatever comes next." As they continued down the road, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the landscape in shadows. The soldiers knew the night would bring new challenges, but for now, they were ready to face whatever lay ahead. Just as they thought they were in the clear, Marcus noticed something in the distance. A pair of headlights appeared on the horizon, moving fast. "Up, guys," he said, his voice tense. "We got another problem." The lights multiplied, revealing a convoy of vehicles, trucks and motorcycles, closing in from both directions. Darnell's expression hardened. "Looks like they called in reinforcements." Jackson's grin returned, this time more determined than ever. "Good, let's finish this." The convoy of vehicles was closing in fast, engines roaring in the night. Trucks with mounted lights illuminated the dark road ahead, while motorcycles flanked both sides. The soldiers in the SUV were now completely surrounded, with no clear path forward or backward. Marcus's grip on the wheel tightened. "Sarge, we're boxed in." Darnell surveyed the scene, his mind racing. "Keep driving for now. We need to find higher ground." Jackson peered out of the back window, watching as the lead truck pulled closer. "Looks like they brought out the big guns this time." Suddenly, a burst of light filled the sky as a flare shot up from one of the trucks. It exploded overhead, bathing the entire area in an eerie red glow. The flare wasn't just for illumination, it was a signal. From the rocky cliffs above, more bikers appeared, their silhouettes outlined against the crimson light. They had the high ground, and, from their vantage point, they could rain down chaos. "This just keeps getting better," Jackson muttered. The radio in the SUV crackled to life. A deep, unfamiliar voice came through, cold and commanding. "Soldiers, you've got nowhere to run. Stop the vehicle and surrender. Maybe we'll let you walk away." Darnell grabbed the radio mic. "Not a chance. You've got one warning. Stand down or you'll regret it." The voice on the other end laughed. "You're outnumbered and outgunned. This isn't a fight you can win." Darnell glanced at Marcus and Jackson. "Looks like we're going to have to prove him wrong." The bikers on the cliffs began their assault, tossing rocks and debris down onto the road. Some of them fired weapons, their shots pinging off the SUV's armored frame. Meanwhile, the convoy behind them sped up, trying to force the soldiers off the road. "Marcus, take that path to the right," Darnell shouted. Marcus spotted a narrow dirt trail veering off from the main road and swerved onto it. The SUV bounced and jolted as they navigated the uneven terrain, but it was their best chance to escape the ambush. The trail wound upward, leading them toward the cliffs. The bikers on the ground followed, their headlights cutting through the darkness like a swarm of fireflies. Jackson leaned out of the window, firing his baton-turned weapon at the pursuers. He managed to knock one biker off his ride, sending him tumbling into the dirt, but there were too many to take down individually. "We're gonna need a new plan, Sarge," Jackson yelled over the chaos. Darnell nodded. "Keep them off us as long as you can. We'll make ours stand at the top." The SUV reached a plateau, a flat stretch of land that overlooked the valley below. Marcus skidded to a stop, and the soldiers quickly got out, taking up defensive positions around the vehicle. "Here they come," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. The convoy arrived moments later, spreading out to surround the soldiers. The grizzled biker leader from earlier stepped forward, now joined by another figure, the man who had spoken on the radio. He was tall, with a scar running down his cheek and an air of authority that marked him as the real leader of the group. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," the leader said, his voice calm but menacing. "But this is where it ends." Darnell stepped forward, his stance unwavering. "You've had every chance to walk away. You chose this." The leader smirked. Brave words for someone who's outnumbered 20-3. Jackson grinned. "We like those odds." Darnell raised his voice, addressing the entire group. "We're soldiers. We've been through worse than this, and we've come out on top every time. If you want to test us, go ahead. But I promise you, it won't end well for any of you." The leader's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered. "You're bluffing?" Darnell didn't blink. "Try me." For a moment, it seemed like the leader might back down. The bikers hesitated, shifting uneasily as they realized the soldiers weren't intimidated. But the leader wasn't ready to concede. He raised a hand, signaling his crew to attack. The bikers surged forward, weapons drawn. But before they could reach the soldiers, the ground beneath them erupted in a deafening explosion. A cloud of dust and debris filled the air, scattering the bikers and forcing them to retreat. When the dust settled, the soldiers stood firm, their positions unshaken. Darnell held a detonator in his hand, his expression steely. "I told you," he said quietly. "You don't want this fight." The bikers were stunned, their confidence shattered. But the leader's eyes burned with rage. "This isn't over," he growled, retreating to regroup his men. As the soldiers prepared for the next wave, they knew the battle was far from finished. The night was only just beginning. The air was thick with tension, dust still settling from the explosion that had bought the soldiers a brief moment of reprieve. The bikers regrouped on the far side of the plateau, shaken but not deterred. Their leader, scar-faced and seething, barked orders, rallying his crew. "Spread out. We're not leaving until they're buried." The bikers complied, splitting into smaller groups to encircle the soldiers. The plateau's high vantage point gave the soldiers a temporary advantage, but Darnell knew it wouldn't last. The bikers were resourceful and relentless. Jackson leaned against the SUV, catching his breath. Well, that got their attention. Marcus checked his sidearm, his hand still steady despite the chaos. "What's the plan, Sarge?" Darnell's mind worked quickly. They had limited resources and were heavily outnumbered. Their only chance was to use the terrain and their training to outmaneuver the bikers. "We hold this position as long as we can," Darnell said, his voice firm. "Marcus, focus on keeping the SUV operational. We might need a quick getaway. Jackson, you're on defense with me." Jackson gave a curt nod, gripping his baton. "Let's give them something to remember." For a few tense moments, the plateau was eerily quiet. The bikers had spread out, their movements masked by the rocky terrain and shadows cast by the moonlight. The soldiers stayed alert, scanning their surroundings for any sign of an attack. Marcus worked quickly under the hood of the SUV, trying to patch up the damage from their earlier skirmish. "Engine's still running, but that tire's a problem." "Do what you can," Darnell said, his eyes never leaving the ridgeline. Then, from the darkness, a biker emerged, revving his engine as he charged toward the SUV. Jackson reacted instantly, stepping into the biker's path and using his baton to knock him off his bike. The machine skidded across the ground, stopping inches from Marcus. "Thanks for the assist," Marcus said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Anytime," Jackson replied, pulling the downed biker's weapon and tossing it aside. But that was only the beginning. The plateau erupted into chaos as more bikers charged in from all sides, their war cries echoing off the cliffs. Darnell and Jackson moved with precision, fending off the attackers with a combination of brute force and tactical skill. Jackson swung his baton like a hammer, disarming bikers and sending them sprawling. Darnell, calm and methodical, used his combat knife to neutralize threats with minimal effort. Marcus, meanwhile, stayed focused on his task, but he couldn't ignore the fight unfolding around him. He grabbed a wrench from the SUV's toolbox, ready to defend himself if necessary. A biker lunged at Marcus, but the young soldier ducked and swung the wrench, catching his attacker in the side. The biker crumpled to the ground, groaning in pain. "Nice move," Jackson called out, taking down another opponent. Despite their best efforts, the bikers' numbers were overwhelming. For everyone they took down, two more seemed to take their place. The soldiers were holding their own, but it was clear they couldn't keep this up forever. Darnell knew they needed to change tactics. "Fall back to the SUV," he shouted. The soldiers retreated, regrouping around their vehicle. The bikers pressed in, sensing an opportunity to overwhelm their foes. As the soldiers prepared to make their final stand, the sound of distant sirens suddenly pierced the night. The bikers froze, their confidence wavering. They hadn't anticipated law enforcement getting involved. Darnell seized the moment. "You hear that?" he called out to the bikers. "That's your cue to leave." The leader stepped forward, his face twisted with rage. "This isn't over," and he growled. "We'll be back." With a reluctant nod, he signaled his crew to retreat. The bikers mounted their bikes and sped off into the night, their engines fading into the distance. The soldiers watched them go, their adrenaline slowly subsiding. The sirens grew louder, and soon a pair of police cars pulled up to the plateau. The officers stepped out, their weapons drawn. But instead of offering assistance, they pointed their guns at the soldiers. "Step away from the vehicle," one of the officers barked. Marcus's eyes widened in disbelief. "What's going on?" Darnell raised his hand slowly, his expression unreadable. "We're not your enemies." The lead officer's face was stern. "We'll see about that. You got some explaining to do." The flashing red and blue lights painted the rocky plateau in sharp contrasts. The tension, which had barely subsided after the bikers retreated, spiked once more. The officers' guns remained trained on the soldiers, their faces unreadable. Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Darnell. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice cautious. Darnell kept his hands raised, his movements calm and deliberate. "We're U.S. soldiers, not criminals. We were defending ourselves." The lead officer, A middle-aged man with a hard-lined face and a nameplate that read Morris stepped closer. "We got reports of a disturbance involving weapons, explosions, and injuries. Care to explain?" Darnell nodded. "We were ambushed by a biker gang. They attacked us first. Check the scene. You'll see we were acting in self-defense." Officer Morris didn't lower his weapon. "That might be true, but right now, all I see are 3 heavily armed individuals and a lot of wreckage." Jackson, leaning casually against the SUV despite the guns pointed at him, smirked. "Heavily armed. All we've got is this baton and a flare gun." Morris didn't appreciate the humor. "Save the jokes. Hands where I can see them." Darnell motioned for Marcus and Jackson to comply. Slowly, they raised their hands. "Look," Darnell said, "we'll cooperate, but you're wasting time. The real criminals are getting away." Morris signaled to his partner, a younger officer named Reed, who approached cautiously and began inspecting the SUV. The air was thick with tension as Reed circled the vehicle, his flashlight scanning for weapons or contraband. "This your ride?" Reed asked. Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. Military issue?" Reed narrowed his eyes. "Mind explaining why there's a blown tire, scratches all over, and what looks like bullet holes?" "Because we've been under attack for the past hour," Marcus replied, his frustration barely contained. "Like we said, check the area. You'll find pieces of their bikes all over the place." Reed hesitated, then looked to Morris. "He's not wrong. There's debris everywhere." Morris lowered his weapon slightly but kept his guard up. "All right, let's say your story checks out. We'll still need to take statements, and until then, you're staying right here." Darnell nodded. "Fair enough. But while we're talking, you might want to send a unit after those bikers. They're armed and dangerous." Morris glanced at Reed, then sighed. "Reed, call it in. Get a couple of units to sweep the area." Reed nodded and walked back to the patrol car to radio for backup. With the immediate threat of arrest subsiding, the soldiers lowered their hands but stayed where they were. Morris kept his distance, still wary but willing to listen. "Start from the beginning," Morris said. "What led to this mess?" Darnell explained the events of the day, from the gas station confrontation to the high-speed chase and the ambush on the plateau. He recounted how the bikers had escalated the situation, forcing the soldiers to defend themselves. Morris listened carefully, his expression unreadable. When Darnell finished, he nodded slowly. "That's quite a story. Got any proof?" Jackson gestured to the wreckage scattered across the plateau. "Plenty of it right here. And if you check the bridge a few miles back, you'll find more." Morris rubbed his chin, considering their words. "We'll verify everything. If it checks out, you'll be free to go. But if anything doesn't add up..." Darnell met his gaze steadily. "It will." Before Morris could respond, Reed returned from the patrol car. "Backup's on the way. I also ran a quick check on their plates. Vehicles registered to the military." Morris nodded, his stance softening slightly. "All right. You're not under arrest, but you're still not off the hook. Stay here until we sort this out." The soldiers leaned against the SUV, catching their breath as they waited for backup to arrive. The tension eased slightly, but the night's events were far from over. Jackson glanced at Darnell. "Think they'll actually catch those bikers?" Darnell shrugged. "Depends on how far they got. They know the terrain better than we do." Marcus, still standing near the hood of the SUV, frowned. "I just hope they don't circle back." Morris overheard and walked over. "You think they'll come after you again?" "They've done it twice already," Darnell replied. "Wouldn't surprise me." Morris's eyes narrowed. "If that's true, we need to stay on high alert." Just as the words left Morris's mouth, the distant sound of engines echoed through the night. Everyone froze, their eyes scanning the darkness. Marcus's heart sank. They're coming back. The rumble grew louder, and soon headlights appeared on the horizon. This time, it wasn't just bikes. It was another convoy, larger than before and moving fast. Morris cursed under his breath. "Everyone, take cover." The soldiers and officers scrambled behind the SUV as the convoy closed in, their engines roaring like thunder. The bikers weren't done yet, and this time they were coming in full force. The roar of engines grew louder, echoing through the rocky plateau. The approaching convoy wasn't just intimidating, it was overwhelming. Headlights pierced the darkness, cutting through the dust kicked up by the advancing bikers. This time, they were better prepared, and they were out for blood. Darnell crouched behind the SUV, quickly assessing their options. "They're coming in hard," he muttered. "We're going to need a plan." Marcus peeked over the hood, his eyes wide. "Looks like twice as many as before." Jackson grinned, his confidence unwavering. "Good. More to send packing. Officer Morris crouched beside them with his service pistol drawn, shot Jackson a wary glance. You guys sure about this? These bikers don't seem like they're backing down. Darnell's tone was calm, but his words carried weight. We don't have a choice. If they break through here, they won't stop until someone's seriously hurt or worse. Morris nodded, his jaw tightening. All right, let's hold the line. The convoy split into two groups. One group charged directly toward the SUV, while the other circled wide, attempting to flank the soldiers and officers from both sides. The bikers' engines roared like a tidal wave, their headlights blinding in the darkness. Here they come, Marcus shouted. The first wave of bikers closed in, weapons raised. One of them swung a chain at the front of the SUV, aiming to break through their cover. Jackson reacted instantly, swinging his baton with precision. The chain wrapped around the baton, and Jackson yanked hard, pulling the biker off his motorcycle. That's one down, Jackson said, tossing the chain aside. Darnell focused on the flankers, who were moving fast along the ridge. He grabbed the flared gun from the SUV and fired a shot toward the rocky outcrop. The bright red flare exploded in midair, illuminating the area and forcing the bikers to slow down. Marcus, focus on the front, Darnell ordered. Jackson, keep those flankers in check. Marcus pulled out his wrench again, ready to defend the SUV. One of the bikers lunged toward him with a crowbar, but Marcus ducked and countered with a swift swing, knocking the biker to the ground. Meanwhile, Officer Reed provided cover fire, his shots ringing out as he targeted the bikers attempting to circle behind them. I've had your six, he called out. Darnell noticed the biker's leader, the scared man from earlier, hanging back in the convoy, barking orders. He wasn't joining the fight directly. He was coordinating, ensuring his crew didn't lose their momentum. We need to take out their leader, Darnell said, pointing him out to Morris. If we cut off the head, the rest will fall apart. Morris nodded. How do you want to play this? Darnell thought quickly. Cover me. I'll draw his attention. Before Morris could protest, Darnell darted out from behind the SUV, moving low and fast. The bikers immediately noticed and redirected their focus. Bullets and chains whizzed past him, but Darnell kept moving, using the terrain for cover. The scarred leader spotted Darnell approaching and revved his engine, preparing to meet him head-on. He pulled out a sawed-off shotgun, aiming it at the soldier. Darnell zigzagged across the plateau, making himself a difficult target. He reached a large boulder and ducked behind it, just as the leader fired. The blast hit the rock, sending shards flying. You're fast, the leader called out, his voice carrying over the noise. But you're out of your depth, soldier. Darnell didn't respond. He pulled out his combat knife and waited for the right moment. The leader dismounted his bike, confident that he had the upper hand. He stalked toward the boulder, shotgun in hand. Come on out, he taunted. Let's finish this. Darnell stayed silent, his breathing steady. He could hear the leader's footsteps crunching against the gravel, growing closer. As the leader rounded the boulder, Darnell struck. In one fluid motion, he disarmed the man, knocking the shotgun aside. The two men grappled, trading blows in a brutal close-quarters fight. The leader was strong, but Darnell's training gave him the edge. He blocked a punch and countered with a sharp elbow to the ribs, forcing the leader to stagger backward. You've got skills, the leader growled, wiping blood from his lip. But this isn't over. He lunged at Darnell again. This time, Darnell was ready. Using the leader's momentum against him, Darnell flipped him onto the ground and pinned him, his knife pressed against the man's throat. Call them off, Darnell said coldly. Now. The leader's eyes burned with defiance, but he knew he was beaten. Slowly he raised his hand and signaled to his crew. The bikers, seeing their leader subdued, began to pull back. But just as it seemed the battle was over, the sound of distant helicopters filled the air. Marcus looked up, his face pale. Sarge, we got more company. In the distance, two helicopters with powerful spotlights were approaching fast. But these weren't police. They were unmarked, and they looked heavily armed. Darnell's heart sank as he realized the fight was far from over. Everyone, get ready. This isn't over yet. The whirring of helicopter blades grew louder, their powerful spotlights sweeping across the plateau. Dust and loose debris swirled in the air, making it difficult to see. The soldiers, officers, and remaining bikers froze momentarily. All eyes turned toward the sky. These guys don't look like your friendly neighborhood cops, Jackson muttered, squinting at the unmarked choppers. Darnell's gut tightened. No, they're not. Whoever they are, they're coming in hot. The helicopters hovered ominously, and then, as if on cue, ropes unfurled from their sides. Within seconds, Black-clad operatives began rappelling down, their movements swift and precise. Each was armed to the teeth, their faces hidden behind tactical masks. "Who the hell are these guys?" Officer Morris demanded, his voice barely audible over the roar of the rotors. Darnell's eyes narrowed. "Mercenaries." The leader of the bikers, still pinned beneath Darnell, smirked despite his position. "Looks like my backup's here." Darnell pressed the knife closer to the leader's throat, his voice low and deadly. "You really think they're here for you?" The leader's smirk faltered. The operatives hit the ground running, spreading out quickly. Their leader, distinguished by a red insignia on his chest, barked orders through a headset. His voice, cold and efficient, cut through the chaos. "Secure the area. Eliminate hostiles." Marcus's face paled. "Sarge, they're coming for all of us." Darnell nodded grimly. "These guys don't take sides. Everyone's a target." The first shots rang out as the operatives opened fire, their assault rifles spitting bullets with ruthless precision. The bikers, realizing they were outmatched, scattered, some trying to flee while others fought back in desperation. Jackson ducked behind the SUV, firing back with his sidearm. Well, this just got a whole lot worse. Morris and Reed took cover behind one of the patrol cars, returning fire as best they could. "We're outgunned," Morris shouted. "We need backup now." Reed frantically called for reinforcements over the radio, but the response was grim. "ETA 15 minutes. "We don't have 15 minutes, Reed muttered. Darnell released the biker leader and stood, his knife still in hand. "If you want to live, call off your men and fight with us." The leader hesitated, his pride warring with his survival instinct. Finally, he gave a sharp whistle, signaling his remaining crew. "Fall back and regroup. We're taking these guys down." The bikers, now temporarily allied with the soldiers and officers, regrouped near the SUV. Together, they formed a defensive perimeter, using the vehicles and natural cover to shield themselves from the operatives' onslaught. Marcus, still crouched near the SUV, reloaded his weapon. "This is insane. We're fighting bikers and mercenaries now." Darnell crouched beside him, his eyes focused. "Stay sharp. We've been in worse situations." Jackson, ever the optimist, grinned. "Yeah, but this one's definitely top 10. The operatives advanced methodically, their tactics honed for maximum efficiency. They moved in coordinated waves, forcing the defenders to constantly adjust their positions. Despite their superior training, the combined efforts of the soldiers, officers, and bikers began to slow them down. Jackson managed to take down one operative with a well-placed shot, while Morris and Reed provided suppressive fire to keep the others at bay. Marcus focused on protecting the SUV, using it as both cover and a weapon, slamming the door into an approaching operative and disarming him. The biker leader, now wielding a shotgun, fought fiercely alongside his crew. "These guys are tougher than they look," he admitted grudgingly. Darnell didn't respond, his focus entirely on the battle. He knew their only chance of survival was to hold out until reinforcements arrived. Amid the chaos, Darnell spotted a weakness in the operatives' formation. Their leader, the man with the red insignia, was coordinating the attack from a vantage point near the edge of the plateau. "If we take out their leader, we can break their momentum," Darnell said. "Marcus, cover me." "Jackson, you're with me." Marcus nodded, providing cover fire as Darnell and Jackson moved toward the operative's leader. The duo advanced quickly, using the terrain to their advantage. Bullets whizzed past them, but their training kept them focused. As they closed the distance, the operative's leader noticed them and raised his rifle. Darnell anticipated the move, throwing his knife with pinpoint accuracy. The blade struck the rifle, knocking it from the leader's hands. Jackson followed up, tackling the leader to the ground. The two men grappled, but Jackson's strength gave him the upper hand. He pinned the leader, his baton raised. "Got him," Jackson shouted. Before Jackson could land the final blow, a deafening explosion rocked the plateau. One of the helicopters, now hovering lower, had launched a missile straight at the SUV. The blast sent everyone flying, debris raining down like shrapnel. The SUV was engulfed in flames, its remains smoldering in the night. Darnell coughed, struggling to his feet as the dust settled. "Status check," he called out. But before anyone could respond, the operatives regrouped, their leader now free and armed again. The battle was far from over, and their situation had just gone from bad to worse. "Hold the line," Darnell shouted, preparing for the next wave. The plateau was a war zone. Flames flickered in the remains of the SUV, casting ominous shadows across the rocky terrain. The operatives regrouped swiftly, their leader barking orders as they moved to encircle the defenders once again. Despite the chaos, Darnell's voice remained steady as he issued commands. Marcus, Jackson, regroup. Morris, read status. Officer Morris coughed, his voice strained but steady. We're here. Took some shrapnel, but we're still in the fight. Reed, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead, gave a thumbs up. Backup still 10 minutes out. That's if they even make it, Marcus muttered, his eyes on the advancing operatives. These guys mean business. Darnell's gaze hardened. Then we give them everything we've got. With their vehicle destroyed and no reinforcements in sight, Darnell knew they needed to think fast. The operatives were moving in a pincer formation, aiming to box them in completely. Jackson, take the left flank, Darnell ordered. Morris, Reed, hold the right. Marcus, you're with me. We're going for their leader again. The biker leader, still catching his breath, interjected. What on us? Darnell glanced at him. You want to survive? Cover our 6 and keep those operatives off our backs. The biker leader nodded reluctantly. You heard him, boys. Let's keep these mercs busy. The makeshift alliance held their ground, each group playing their part. Jackson moved like a force of nature, taking down operatives with precision strikes. Morris and Reed provided suppressive fire, forcing the enemy to take cover behind the boulders. Meanwhile, Darnell and Marcus worked their way toward the operatives' leader, who remained near the edge of the plateau, orchestrating the assault. His tactical awareness was impressive, but Darnell knew that without him, the operatives would lose their edge. The path to the leader was treacherous, with loose rocks and steep inclines. The operatives guarding him were heavily armed, their positions fortified. Darnell signaled to Marcus to take a detour and flank them from the side. Marcus nodded, moving swiftly and silently along the ridge. Darnell waited for the right moment, then emerged from cover, drawing the guards' attention. Over here, Darnell shouted, firing his sidearm to keep them occupied. The guards returned fire, their bullets ricocheting off the rocks around him. But their focus on Darnell gave Marcus the opening he needed. He crept up behind them, taking down one guard with a well-placed strike to the back of the head. Darnell seized the moment, advancing quickly. Together, he and Marcus overwhelmed the remaining guards, clearing the path to the leader. The operatives' leader stood his ground, his weapon trained on Darnell. You've been a thorn in my side all night, he said, his voice cold. But it ends here. Darnell didn't flinch. You've lost your advantage. Call off your men. The leader smirked. You really think you've won? Reinforcements are already on the way. You're just buying time. Darnell raised his weapon. Enough talk. The leader fired first, but Darnell was faster. He sidestepped the shot and returned fire, his bullets grazing the leader's shoulder. The leader staggered but didn't go down. Instead, he pulled a knife from his belt and charged. Darnell met him head-on, their blades clashing in a brutal close-quarters fight. Marcus circled, looking for an opening to assist, but the two men moved too fast, their combat skills evenly matched. The leader lunged, aiming for Darnell's chest, but Darnell sidestepped and countered with a powerful strike to the leader's arm, disarming him. The knife clattered to the ground. Darnell pressed his advantage, pinning the leader against a boulder. It's over. Call them off. The leader grinned despite the pain. You think you've won? Look around. Darnell glanced over his shoulder and froze. The second helicopter had landed on the far side of the plateau, and more operatives were disembarking, carrying heavier weaponry, including a rocket launcher. Marcus, fall back, Darnell shouted. The leader took advantage of Darnell's momentary distraction, shoving him backward and breaking free. He grabbed a nearby rifle and aimed it at Marcus. But before he could fire, a deafening explosion rocked the plateau. One of the bikers, using the last Molotov cocktail from their stash, had hit the operative's supply cage, causing a massive blast. The flames spread quickly, forcing everyone, soldiers, bikers, and operatives alike, to scramble for cover. In the chaos, the operatives with the rocket launcher took aim at the ridge where Darnell and Marcus were positioned. Target locked, one of them said. Fire. The rocket screamed toward them, leaving a trail of smoke. Darnell grabbed Marcus, shoving him out of the way just as the missile hit. The explosion sent a shockwave through the plateau, and the ridge collapsed, sending both soldiers tumbling toward the edge. As the dust settled, the others could only watch in horror. Darnell, Marcus, Jackson shouted, running toward the rubble, but there was no sign of them. Had the fall been fatal, or was this just the beginning of another fight for survival? The plateau was a scene of utter devastation. Smoke and fire billowed from the wreckage, and the once sturdy ridge now lay in a heap of rubble. Jackson skidded to a halt near the edge, frantically scanning the debris below for any sign of his comrades. "Darnell, Marcus," he yelled, his voice echoing across the canyon. Morris and Reed sprinted over, their faces pale. "Do you see them?" Morris asked, fear creeping into his tone. Jackson shook his head, his jaw clenched. "Not yet." The biker leader, limping from the earlier explosion, joined them. "They're right there," he said, pointing to the collapsed ridge. "If they went down with that, it's a long drop." For a moment, no one spoke. The air was filled with the crackling of flames and the distant hum of the second helicopter, which had now taken off again, circling like a vulture. The operatives were regrouping, their leaders still barking orders despite his injuries. Then from below, a faint voice broke through the silence. "We're here." Jackson's heart leaped. "Marcus." Peering over the edge, he spotted movement among the rocks. There, clinging to a narrow ledge just a few feet below the cliff's edge, were Darnell and Marcus. Both were battered and bruised, but alive. "Hang tight," Jackson called down. "We'll get you out of there." Morris and Reed quickly retrieved a rope from one of the patrol cars. Working together, they anchored it securely and tossed it down to the ledge. Darnell grabbed the rope first, testing its strength before signaling to Marcus. "You go up first," Darnell said, his tone firm. Marcus hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you." "Move." Marcus nodded, gripping the rope tightly as he began his climb. Despite the strain on his arms and the pain in his legs, he made steady progress, driven by sheer determination. Jackson and Morris leaned over the edge, guiding him as he neared the top. "Almost there, kid," Jackson said, extending a hand. With one final pull, Marcus reached the top, collapsing onto solid ground. "Guide you," Jackson said, hauling him up fully. Darnell followed next, his climb slower but equally determined. As he neared the top, the operatives opened fire again, forcing Morris and Reed to return fire to cover him. "Hurry up, Sarge," Reed shouted. With a final push, Darnell reached the top and rolled onto the plateau. "Thanks," he said, breathing heavily. But there was no time to celebrate. The operatives were advancing again, their leader determined to finish what they'd started. "We're out of time," Darnell said, pulling Marcus to his feet. "We need to hold them off until reinforcements arrive." Jackson nodded, his face set. "Let's give them everything we've got." The defenders regrouped, using the remaining vehicles and natural cover as their final defensive line. The bikers, to their credit, fought fiercely, standing shoulder to shoulder with the soldiers and officers. Despite their differences, they all shared a common goal: survival. The operatives advanced in a tight formation, their weapons firing in unison. Bullets ricocheted off rocks and vehicles, creating a deafening cacophony. But the defenders held their ground, each of them pushing their limits. Darnell moved with precision, taking out operatives with well-placed shots. Marcus, despite his exhaustion, fought with renewed vigor, his determination unshakable. Jackson, as always, was a force of nature, his every move calculated to inflict maximum damage. Even the biker leader proved his worth, using his shotgun to devastating effect. "We're not going down without a fight," he roared. Just as it seemed the defenders would be overwhelmed, the sound of distant sirens grew louder. Moments later, multiple police SUVs and military Humvees appeared on the horizon, their lights cutting through the smoke. The operatives hesitated, realizing their time was up. The leader scowled, signaling his men to retreat. The remaining operatives pulled back, disappearing into the night as the reinforcements arrived. The battle was over. As the dust settled, the defenders collapsed in exhaustion. Paramedics began tending to the injured, while officers secured the area. Darnell, Marcus, and Jackson sat together near the edge of the plateau, their faces grim but relieved. "That was close," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. Darnell nodded. "Too close." Morris approached, his expression softer than before. "You guys did good. Without you, we wouldn't have made it." Jackson chuckled. "Guess we're not just soldiers after all." The biker leader limped over, his face unreadable. He'd extended a hand to Darnell. "Looks like we owe you one." Darnell shook his hand. "Let's just call it even." As the sun began to rise, casting its warm light over the battered plateau, it was clear that this night would not be forgotten. They had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious, not as soldiers, bikers, or officers, but as survivors. Just as they began to relax, an officer approached Darnell with a serious expression. "Sir, we got a problem. We found something in the wreckage." He held up a black case, marked with a symbol Darnell didn't recognize. Inside was a device, still intact despite the explosion. Darnell's eyes narrowed. "What is it?" The officer shook his head. "We're not sure. But whatever it is, it's military grade. And it's not supposed to be here. Darnell exchanged a look with Jackson and Marcus. Their ordeal might have been over, but the mystery had only just begun. The first rays of dawn spread across the plateau, illuminating the scars of the night's battle. The air was still heavy with smoke and tension, but for the first time in hours, the gunfire had ceased. Reinforcements swarmed the area, their disciplined movements bringing a sense of order to the chaos. Darnell stood by the smoldering remains of the SUV, the mysterious black case in his hands. Its weight felt symbolic, a reminder that their battle wasn't just about survival. It was part of something larger. Officer Morris approached, his face a mixture of relief and concern. "We've got the area secured. No sign of the operatives or the bikers who flowed." Darnell nodded. "Good. But this case, it's not standard mercenary equipment. We need answers." Within minutes, a group of federal agents arrived, their dark suits and serious expressions, making it clear they meant business. The leader, Agent Carter, approached Darnell and the others, flashing her badge. "We're with Homeland Security," she said briskly. "We've been tracking these operatives for months. They're part of a rogue paramilitary group involved in illegal arms deals and other covert operations." Darnell handed her the case. "They left this behind. Any idea what it is?" Agent Carter opened the case carefully, revealing a sleek, advanced device with a digital interface. Her face darkened. "This is a prototype military communications jammer. In the wrong hands, it could disrupt critical operations across an entire region." Marcus frowned. "Why would bikers and mercenaries be working together? What's their endgame?" Carter sighed. "The bikers were a smokescreen, used to create chaos and draw attention away from the real operation. The mercenaries were here to retrieve this device, but thanks to you, they failed." As the cleanup continued, news came in over the radio. Several of the mercenaries and road bikers had been apprehended by local authorities. The scar-faced biker leader, along with the mercenary commander, was among those captured. "They'll be facing a long list of charges," Carter said. "And trust me, they won't see daylight for a very long time." The biker leader, defiant even in cuffs, sneered as he was led away. "You think you've won? This isn't over." Jackson smirked, leaning against a patrol car. "Oh, it's over for you, pal. Hope you enjoy your new home." With the immediate threat neutralized, attention turned to the heroes of the night. The soldiers, officers, and even the bikers who had fought together were commended for their bravery. Officer Morris shook Darnell's hand. "I misjudged you guys. Without your training and leadership, we wouldn't have made it." Darnell gave a small smile. "Just doing our duty." Agent Carter stepped forward, addressing the group. "What you all did here tonight saved lives and prevented a major security breach. You'll be formally recognized for your actions." She handed Darnell a sealed envelope. "Your commanding officer will want to see this. It's not everyday civilians and soldiers work together to take down a rogue operation." The biker leader, now free from his past alliances, approached Darnell. "We don't exactly do medals, but," he handed over a patched leather vest. "Consider this our thanks." Darnell accepted the vest with a nod. "Let's hope you use your second chance wisely." The biker leader smirked. "You got my word." As the sun climbed higher, the soldiers prepared to leave. They were tired, bruised, but alive. Marcus looked out over the plateau, now buzzing with activity. "We made it," he said quietly. Darnell clapped a hand on his shoulder, and we'll keep making it, one battle at a time. Jackson, ever the optimist, grinned. "Let's just hope the next one involves less fire and fewer explosions." The trio shared a laugh, their bond stronger than ever. Back at their base, Darnell, Marcus, and Jackson stood before their commanding officer, who reviewed the report from Homeland Security. After a long pause, he looked up, a rare smile on his face. "You've done the Army proud. Your quick thinking and courage turned a dangerous situation into a victory. You'll each receive commendations, and your actions will be noted in your service records." As they saluted, Darnell felt a sense of closure. The battle had been won, justice served, and their sacrifices recognized. Later, as they sat together in the mess hall, Jackson raised his glass. "To the craziest night of our lives, and to surviving it." Marcus and Darnell raised theirs, a quiet pride in their eyes. The fight was over, but the lessons in camaraderie would stay with them forever. And somewhere far from the chaos of that night, the sun rose on a new day, one where heroes had triumphed and villains had met their end.